Imagine yourself lying in the stillness of the night, letting your breath flow slowly, unhurried, asking nothing but calm. Like the earth once inhabited by generations long gone, your body now only longs to rest. Let this voice carry you to a place far from noise, to a world where time moves slowly, as though every second wants to carve itself into the cold air. There is nothing you need to chase, nothing you must accomplish tonight. All that exists is the quiet peace that slowly spreads through your body. As your eyes begin to feel heavy, imagine a long corridor lit by dim light, at the end of which lies a layer of ancient soil holding stories that were never truly finished. It is there that this journey will begin, a tale that comes from prehistoric graves, from silent bones, from cooled ashes, holding secrets they never told to anyone. Listen quietly, for we are not here to seek answers. We are only walking slowly, following whispers that rise from the past, whispers of bones buried in the earth, waiting to be heard once again. Take a deep breath slowly, then release it gently, letting your body sink further into a weightless calm. Imagine the cool earth beneath you, as if the layers of soil are supporting you with an endless patience. There is no rush here, no harsh sound, only a soft rhythm that seems to blend with the heartbeat of nature. In this stillness, you will be invited to step into the shadows of the past, where ancient people closed their eyes for the last time and let their bodies return to the ground. Every blade of grass, every grain of sand, and every layer of stone is a silent witness, holding stories that were never spoken. As you let your thoughts drift, feel that you are standing beside them, not as a visitor, but as someone invited to listen without disturbing, to feel without needing to understand. This voice will only guide you slowly, leading you deeper, tracing corridors filled with whispers, not always clear, but always present, like a faint song rising from bones buried thousands of years ago. With every step, let your drowsiness grow heavier. Let your eyelids sink lower. For the deeper you drift into stillness, the closer you come to the secrets they wish to tell in silence. Imagine we are standing on a vast plain, thousands of years before the first record was written by human hands. Years no longer carry meaning, for time in those days was not measured by numbers, but by the turning of seasons, by the rivers swelling and receding, by births and deaths coming one after another. This land, which may now seem silent and unfamiliar, was once the center of life for a small band of early humans who walked with sturdy bodies, sharp eyes, and a simple fear of the dark night. There were no kingdoms, no cities, only small groups moving from one valley to another, leaving footprints in the mud and ashes from fires that had gone out. Yet beneath that simplicity lay something deeper, something even we today struggle to truly understand. They buried their people in particular ways, as if death was not merely an ending, but a doorway that had to be crossed with provisions and prayers whose meanings we no longer know. The small mounds they left behind may now look like nothing more than ordinary rises in the earth. But when dug carefully, we find bones arranged with care, charcoal placed beside the head, and stones chosen, specifically to mark the final resting place. All of it signals that they lived in a world richer than mere hunting and survival, a world where shadows and beliefs walked side by side, even though their words have long been carried away by the wind. Now let us allow imagination to wander further, to a valley hidden between limestone cliffs and dense ancient forests. Here, thousands of years ago, a group of humans once settled briefly, leaving traces that were later buried by earth and time. If we were to walk slowly among the shrubs and rocks, we might feel something different in the air, as if the ground still carries whispers from those long gone. This valley has no name, yet for those who once lived here, every tree, every stone, and every stream had meaning. At the bottom of the valley lie small mounds of earth, arranged not randomly. When excavated, they reveal skeletal remains laid with care, sometimes accompanied by simple objects such as sharpened stones, fragments of animal bones, or charcoal from the last fire lit. These objects may seem trivial to us, yet perhaps to them they carried greater meaning. Perhaps tokens of affection, perhaps provisions for a journey unseen. There are no written records, no symbols we can read. Only the positions of bodies and small objects remain as the only language left behind. And in that silence, we can only wonder, was this valley once a place where the visible world met the unseen, or was it simply a modest habit born from grief? Imagine turning back along the timeline, about 40,000 years ago, when Europe was still gripped by long winters and dense forests filled with wild beasts. At that time, modern humans had only just begun to set foot on the continent, sharing living space with another being equally strong and resilient. The Neanderthal, they were stocky figures, shorter but muscular, with prominent brows and sloping foreheads. For thousands of years, they lived side by side with modern humans, hunting in the same forests, drinking from the same rivers. Perhaps even occasionally exchanging glances filled with unspoken curiosity. Yet history tells a different story. Slowly but surely, the traces of the Neanderthals began to fade. Their bones remained buried in caves and valleys, but their voices disappeared from the world. No one knows exactly why. Was it silent warfare, unseen disease, or simply the cruel passing of time? All theories remain open, and what lingers are only unanswered questions. In the shadows of night, when we close our eyes, we can imagine the last fire they lit, then extinguished forever, leaving behind only cold ashes buried in the soil. In a hidden valley, far from the reach of full sunlight, the Neanderthals lived their days in rhythm with the pulse of the earth. Morning began when mist still clung to the treetops and dew dripped from the leaves. They emerged from caves or simple shelters built from branches and animal hides, carrying stone-tipped spears patiently sharpened. Then followed the tracks of great deer that had crossed the frozen meadow the night before. Their voices were seldom heard, communication limited to short murmurs, body language, and glances filled with meaning. Children followed behind, picking up stones or sticks, quietly learning how to read the wind's direction, or how to recognize the soft ground left by an animal's tread. The women gathered roots, seeds, and mushrooms from between rocks, while the elders sat close to the fire, tending the embers to keep them from dying under the wind. Every movement was simple, yet calculated, for a single mistake could mean hunger or even death. Night fell quickly, and in the darkness, the forest became a space filled with sounds, not all of them friendly. The campfire became the center of their world, a place to gather, share food, warm their bodies, and perhaps, in a language now lost, tell stories of forest spirits or ancestors long gone. The food they consumed was never luxurious, yet each piece was the result of long struggle. Deer or bison meat was divided carefully, large cuts for those strong enough to hunt, tender portions for children and the weak. Bones were boiled for hours so the remaining marrow could be extracted, an irreplaceable source of energy in winter. Animal hides were dried on stones and smoked, then turned into body coverings, sewn with plant fibers or animal sinew using polished bone needles. Thick furs served as blankets spread across the hard cave floor to make sleep warmer. They did not know clothing in our modern sense, yet the layers of skin and fur tied to their bodies could withstand the piercing cold air. Between simple evening meals, they also chewed bitter roots that served as medicine or certain leaves believed to soothe the stomach. Nothing was written, nothing was taught through long words, but passed down through repetition, observation, and experience. Children learned by watching, imitating, and then trying. If they failed, reprimand came through sharp glances or heavier tasks the next day. Behind all limitations, there existed a quiet social system, a harmony without the concepts of writing, law, or organized religion, yet one that kept them surviving together. Night was always the most fragile yet poetic moment for them. The campfire was lit carefully, dry twigs snapped, and blown gently until the small spark became a flame that kept the darkness from swallowing the entire cave. Fire was not only protection from wild animals, but also the center of nightlife, a place where everyone gathered without excessive words. Smoke licked the stone ceiling, leaving black stains that can still be seen thousands of years later. The forest's sounds drifted faintly outside, wolves howling far in the valley, nightbirds flying low, and sometimes the faint steps of large unseen animals. Inside the cave, they sat in a circle, bodies wrapped in animal skins, eyes glowing with the red-orange light of fire. Some fell asleep with their heads resting on the shoulders of their kin, while others stared blankly at the swaying flames, as if listening to silent tales understood only by the fire itself. There was a vague belief that dreams arriving on cold nights were messages from ancestors, and that the spirits of those who had gone still sat at the edge of the fire circle. Children drifted to sleep first, while the adults remained awake, ears alert to sounds that might mean danger. No clock governed their nights, only the natural rhythm of the body and the slow comfort that came as long as the fire kept burning. Morning arrived in a way that was never rushed, the first light slipping in through the cave's mouth, slowly crawling across the cold stone floor, touching the animal skins that served as their bedding. There was no rooster's cry, no clanging bell, only the light giving a sign that the night had surrendered to the day. They woke slowly, no hurried business, only the gentle stretch of bodies, pulling the damp air into their lungs and exhaling it with a faint, heavy sound that echoed within the cave. The children woke last, often with tangled hair and faces still carrying traces of dreams. They rekindled the fire that had nearly died with embers saved from the night. Adding small twigs, blowing until the tongues of flame returned to dance. The fire's revival always brought relief, for without it, they were fragile bodies bitten by cold air and threatened by darkness. Once the fire burned again, some stepped outside, tracing the edge of the forest with cautious steps, seeking signs of danger while reading the sky to see whether the day would bring rain or enough clarity for the hunt. The scent of morning was never the same, sometimes carrying the smell of wet soil, sometimes wild grass newly pressed, sometimes the sharp odor of an animal's carcass left near the river. They read all those signs with instinct, not words, as if the world spoke in a subtle language that could only be understood through silence. They prepared themselves for hunting or gathering women, collecting simple baskets woven from dry grasses men sharpening. Stone blades on hard surfaces producing repetitive sounds that might seem ordinary to us, but to them were the sounds of life itself. Breakfast was rare, sometimes only dried meat from the night before, sometimes roots boiled in stone vessels filled with hot water, sometimes nothing but gulps of cold river water. Morning was always the beginning of uncertainty, for they never knew whether the day would bring food or simply hunger carried until night returned again. Yet within that uncertainty there was also a kind of calm, because their lives always moved to follow the rhythm of nature, a rhythm far larger than themselves, a rhythm they could never control, only obey with patience. As the sun climbed a little higher, its light pierced the gaps between trees and cast layered shadows on the forest floor. That was when several men left the cave with measured steps, carrying wooden spears tipped with sharp stones bound by plant fibers. There was no loud conversation, only soft whispers or hand signals. For every unnecessary sound could drive away the animals they sought. Those spears may seem simple to our eyes, yet in the roughly polished stone tips lay the hope of a midday meal or the long disappointment of returning empty-handed. The younger ones learned from the older, mimicking the way of walking that made almost no sound, stepping on soft ground with feet attuned to the texture of dry leaves. Meanwhile, women and children took a different path, following shrubs and riverbanks in search of roots, seeds, or edible fruits. They carried grass-woven baskets on their backs, filling them with whatever could last until nightfall. Often they also gathered medicinal leaves believed to ease fevers or heal wounds. Hunting never guaranteed success. Animals were often cleverer than hunters, sensing human scent from afar or hearing the faint snap of a twig before vanishing into the forest. Sometimes the hunters returned empty-handed, bringing only stories of deer tracks lost in the river's flow or wild boars fleeing into thorny thickets. Yet there were days when fortune favored them, when a deer or antelope was cornered on a cliff, and the spear flew to pierce its body, met with a small cheer quickly hushed to avoid drawing attention. The animal was butchered on the spot, part of its meat carried immediately, the rest left behind to be collected later, though often other creatures came first to claim it. All of this was part of the balance they lived in, the balance between hunger and fullness, between the energy spent and the energy regained from the meat consumed. There were no grand feasts, only fires that burned brighter than usual, simple cuts of meat roasted, and weary faces that felt just a little safer for one more night. In between those hunts, there were always pauses when they stopped, sat under a large tree, observed the tireless march of ants, listened to birds calling to their mates, or simply let silence flow into their minds. Time moved slowly, and within that slowness, they experienced life not as a race, but as a current to follow without resistance. Evening arrived with slow steps, as if the sun itself was reluctant to leave the forest, damp from morning dew and now warm with golden light. The hunters returned with faces that held many meanings, some carrying the burden of fresh meat on their shoulders, others bringing back only empty spears with weary yet steadfast eyes. At the mouth of the cave, the women greeted them with a silence full of understanding. There were no complaints, for everyone knew that hunting was always a matter of fate. Children ran lightly to meet them, some eager to help carry pieces of meat, others simply wanting to look closer, to smell the metallic warmth of fresh blood, to feel part of the adult world that seemed vast and full of secrets. The fire that had been lit since midday was now built higher, dry wood stacked, sparks scattering into the air, while smoke began to fill the cave's hollow, mingling with the scent of wet stone and burning grass. Pieces of meat were skewered with long sticks hung above the embers, slowly releasing fat that dripped and hissed. The aroma spread, summoning empty stomachs, yet no one devoured in haste. Everything unfolded in a slow rhythm. Some of the elders sat farther back, watching the younger ones work, giving occasional signals about how to place the wood so the embers would last longer, or how to cut the meat to make it easier to share. There was no grand ceremony, yet a sacredness emerged from that simple togetherness. Sometimes, before the meat was divided, an elder would take a small piece, throwing it into the fire as if offering it to something unseen, to the forest, to the ancestors, or to the night soon to descend. The children watched without asking much, accepting that some things were done not to be understood, but to preserve a balance that could not be explained with words. That night, the crackle of fire competed with the sound of crickets and nocturnal birds, creating a faint backdrop of sound, like an ancient music never written down, only experienced by those present. In that dim light, faces appeared calm, some drifting to sleep against the cave wall, others simply sitting and gazing at the fire, letting their thoughts wander to unknown places. No one could say for certain what they were thinking, perhaps about tomorrow's journey, perhaps about dreams yet to come, or perhaps about the silence itself, which seemed to be an answer. The night cloaked the forest in deep darkness, stars appearing one by one through the openings in the canopy above. While inside the cave, the firelight slowly dimmed, leaving behind red embers that pulsed gently like a heart, keeping the group alive. People lay down on the floor covered with dry leaves, some leaning against cold stone, others sleeping pressed together to share body warmth. The sound of steady breathing filled the space, mingling with the sigh of wind drifting in from the cave's mouth, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The children fell asleep quickly, sometimes with small smiles, perhaps carried away by simple dreams of running through meadows or finding sweet fruit beneath a broad tree. The adults were more restless, eyes closed but ears alert, for the night was never truly safe. Tigers might be watching, wolves could be hungry, or the snap of a branch might come from an unseen source. In that darkness, the fading fire became the only boundary between comfort and threat, between the warm world inside the cave and the unpredictable world outside. In some corners, a few remained awake, sitting quietly and staring at the embers, as if trying to read something in the shifting glow, perhaps remembering those who had passed, or simply seeking calm in the silence. At times, a faint murmur could be heard, a prayer without fixed words, only whispers to the night, to the earth, to the spirits believed to still wander nearby. No one knew whether the dreams that came were mere play of the mind or messages from something greater. Some dreamed of falling into bottomless chasms, others of seeing the faces of ancestors smiling, carrying fire in their hands. All of it was kept in silence, rarely told, for dreams were considered private, not to be shared unless truly significant. The night went on, time seemed to dissolve, and the voice of the cave lulled not only bodies, but souls as well. Outside, the moon rose slowly, its light piercing through the trees, revealing long shadows that seemed to move, though no wind stirred. There were no answers to what truly roamed the forest that night, only a calmness covering unease, like a thin blanket that did not truly protect, but was enough to let people drift into sleep. Dawn came slowly, like someone reluctant to wake a sleeping world, at first with a pale light seeping through the gaps of the trees, then with a faint red glow hanging in the eastern sky. Inside the cave, the sound of dew dripping from stone grew clearer, falling onto the damp ground with a slow rhythm, like a primitive clock marking the passing of the night. The first to awaken were usually the women, rising with slow movements, stretching their bodies, then checking the fire that remained as embers, adding dry twigs so that thin smoke appeared again, keeping the fading warmth from disappearing entirely. The children shifted in their sleep, some opening their eyes only to close them again, as if wishing to remain in the dream world warmer than the cold morning air. The men followed, sitting up while rubbing their eyes, gazing out of the cave, ensuring that no threats lingered from the darkness of the night. Birds began to sing, first one or two calls, then slowly growing into a small orchestra announcing the day's arrival. The air carried the fresh scent of damp earth, mingled with the lingering smoke of wood. They gathered around the embers, exchanging glances, sometimes without words, only with slight nods or faint smiles. Some chewed bitter roots to ease their hunger. Some shared leftover fruits still hard. There were no clocks to mark time, no calendars to measure days. Only a shared sense that morning meant the beginning of new efforts, and that life must continue. Dawn always brought relief because the night full of uncertainty had passed, yet also brought unease because the day ahead was filled with tasks demanding strength and vigilance. No one knew whether today would bring the fortune of fresh meat or only long failure without result. On their faces, the morning light clung softly, revealing lines of weariness that never fully vanished, and in their eyes rested a kind of silence, like the awareness that life was fragile, dependent on small things that could change at any moment. Dawn was only a pause, not the end of restlessness, but enough to give new breath, enough to make them stand again and walk into a day that was never certain. Morning slowly advanced, the light piercing more strongly through the trees, forming thin lines on the ground, still damp with dew. Outside the cave, the air felt colder than inside, yet more alive, filled with the sound of busy insects and the movement of leaves touched by the wind. Some of the men began to stand, taking up wooden spears whose tips had been hardened by last night's fire, checking the fiber bindings that held sharp stones to the shaft. They knew that weapons were an extension of life, and that without precision, the hunt could end with wounds or even death. The women busied themselves gathering skin pouches used for carrying water, roots, or fruits they might find along the way. Children ran briefly near the cave entrance, laughing softly before stopping when the gaze of the adults warned them not to stray too far. There was a rhythm that hardly changed from day to day, a simple pattern followed without many questions, for survival was always more important than reason. Part of the group walked toward the forest, following paths already known from previous tracks, hoping to find animals that could be trapped or struck with spears. Others headed to the river, where the clear water offered not only drink, but also the chance of fish or shellfish. The women who remained near the cave began gathering small wood, separating dry twigs from damp branches, then piling them near the fire that now burned again. They knew fire was not only warmth, but also protection, light, and even a way to preserve meat longer. That morning felt calm, yet always carried a faint sense that calmness was temporary, that any strange sound or shifting shadow could change the balance. As the sun climbed higher, the light falling on their faces made their skin look harsher, marked with small scratches that were signs of long journeys. No one truly spoke much, but body language was enough, for they understood that words were not always necessary. Each movement was part of togetherness, and every togetherness was part of survival. The hunting group walked farther from the cave, following a narrow path formed by repeated steps among the trees. The forest appeared dense, its canopy closing off the sunlight and leaving a dim atmosphere, making shadows move slowly across the damp ground. Every step felt cautious, for a snapping twig or a sound too loud could drive prey away before they even saw it. Spears were gripped tightly, not only as tools for striking, but also as protection should danger suddenly appear from an unseen direction. Leaves falling from above sometimes created the illusion of movement, sharpening their ears, searching for signs of whether it was merely the wind or something larger hiding in the distance. Occasionally, one of them crouched, touching the muddy ground, reading faint tracks, perhaps left by deer or wild boar, then pointing the way with a brief gesture without words. There was a silent language already trained, because speaking would only break the silence needed to approach their prey. Their faces were serious, eyes scanning every gap between tree trunks, as if the forest itself was a secret that had to be solved. The smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of dry leaves and the faint trace of their sweat carried in the cold morning air. In that forest, time seemed to slow. Seconds stretched long by a constant sense of alertness. There was tension, but also familiarity, for they had grown used to living with danger always close. They knew hunting was not only about gaining food, but also about proving courage, preserving the pride of the group, and ensuring that the children in the cave could sleep with filled stomachs. The prey might come, or might not, but the journey itself had already become part of their life, a ritual repeated with deep patience. The tracks began to appear clearer as the wet ground showed deeper imprints, perhaps from a large deer that had just passed. One of the hunters pointed toward a broken low branch, as if a large animal had hurried through. They paused for a moment, drawing quiet breaths, allowing their ears to merge with the forest's sounds. There was a faint noise, like heavy breathing or the brushing of a body against the undergrowth. Their bodies tensed, and the spears that had once been held loosely were now raised, their tips pointing forward. Their eyes met one another's. No word spoken, only glances filled with understanding. With light steps, they began to move forward, parting the brush without a sound. Leaves brushed against their legs, while the faint noise of insects grew sharper within the pressing silence. Their hearts beat faster, not only from fear, but also from the hope that prey had finally been found. The closer they walked, the more distinct became the faint animal scent carried on the wind, a mixture of sweat and damp earth. One of the hunters crouched, pressing his ear to the ground, listening to the faint tremor of footsteps still far ahead. He rose slowly, signaling with his hand that the prey was not too far in front. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as though the forest itself was watching. Sunlight piercing through the gaps in the leaves fell upon the ground in tiny spots, like markers pointing out the path they must follow. Time once again stretched long, each second part of a delicate tension between patience and need. Perhaps they would find the animal trapped within the forest's confines, or perhaps it had already sensed their steps and fled farther away. Nothing was certain, except that they must continue forward. In that silence, their bodies seemed to merge with the forest, becoming part of its hidden secret, waiting to see if this day would bring them a small victory or only another lesson in endless patience. A faint shadow began to appear among the trees, moving slowly as if weighing its path. A large deer with branching antlers stood in the distance, its eyes restless, ears twitching quickly to catch every sound. Its body glistened with sweat and morning dew, its reddish-brown fur reflecting the sunlight that slipped through gaps in the leaves. The hunters froze in place, holding their breath so even the air they exhaled would not betray them. The spears in their hands trembled faintly, not from weakness, but from the tension of energy waiting to be released. The forest seemed even quieter, as if every other creature had gone still. Watching the fateful encounter between humans and an animal that had long been part of the cycle of life, the deer lowered its head, sniffing the ground as if sensing something unusual. A dry leaf crushed under the foot of one hunter gave a faint sound, barely audible, but enough to make the animal's ears shoot up. In an instant, its body stiffened, ready to leap into the thicker undergrowth. It was then that one of the hunters hurled his spear with a movement both swift and silent. The air trembled as the long wooden shaft spun toward the deer's body. A dull thud echoed as the spear struck its rib. The deer staggered but did not fall. With its last strength, it leaped, crashing through the brush, leaving a trail of fresh red blood upon the green leaves. The hunters quickly ran, following the path of the wounded animal, their eyes fixed only on the drops of crimson staining the ground. Their breath came fast, their bodies united by a single purpose. Yet, the farther they chased, the denser the forest grew. The fainter the deer's sound became, and urgency shifted into a mix of hope and despair. None could tell whether the animal would soon collapse or escape farther still, vanishing into the endless maze of trees. The trail of blood grew thinner, dripping in lines no longer straight but twisting, as if the wounded deer wandered aimlessly, dragged down by its weakening body. The hunters studied the ground with sharp eyes, searching for crimson stains among the dry leaves and the wet moss clinging to stones. Each drop of blood felt like a clue drawing them deeper into the forest, into a place they might never have entered before. Their breaths came in gasps, but they kept silent, knowing haste would only let their steps betray them to other hidden creatures. From time to time, they stopped to listen, hearing only the faint echo of distant birds, not the heavy sound of the animal they pursued. The forest around them changed, tree trunks standing closer, massive roots bulging from the earth like veins rising from the body of the land, making their journey harder. A young hunter bent down, spotting a smear of blood on a scraped patch of bark. Proof that the deer had collided with a tree in its desperate flight. Now, their conviction grew stronger. The animal would not survive long. Yet within that certainty lay unease, for the dwindling blood made them doubt whether they were still on the right path. The sunlight filtering through the canopy dimmed, time moving unnoticed. Their empty stomachs grumbled, yet none spoke. In silence, they all knew their pursuit was more than a hunt for meat, it was a ritual binding them to the ancestors who once walked these forests thousands of years ago. The sun had finally sunk completely, leaving the sky holding only a dim glow like ashes left after a great fire. The forest slowly swallowed the last traces of light, and within minutes, darkness became master among the towering trees. The hunters paused, gathering breath, staring into the thickening shadows. A fire could not be lit, for its flames might draw the attention of other predators lurking nearby. They relied only on the faint glow of the moon caught between branches, dripping like silver water onto the wet leaves. At night, the forest lived with different voices, no longer birdsong, but the cry of owls, the wings of bats, and the scrape of twigs, never certain whether made by the wind or by something moving slowly. The blood trail had nearly vanished, consumed by darkness, turning the hunt into a matter of instinct rather than sight. Their bodies were weary, their legs heavy, yet they pressed on. For losing the deer meant returning empty-handed, returning with hollow stomachs. An old hunter stopped, closing his eyes to listen, then pointed westward, certain he had heard the labored breath of a dying creature. The others nodded, following, though unease pressed thicker on their hearts. In the darkness of that ancient forest, their footsteps sounded like whispers, as if the earth itself recorded each imprint, storing a new story that one day might be forgotten, just like the bones now buried beneath the damp soil. They found the deer not far from a winding stream that coiled between massive roots. Its body lay on its side, breath ragged, blood seeping into the soil and mixing with the water of the stream. Its eyes remained open, reflecting the pale light of the moon as if staring blankly at them. Its breathing was heavy, like the final puff of a dying flame. The hunters approached cautiously, weapons in hand, though none were truly needed now. For the animal was clearly at the edge of death. Yet something was wrong, something they could not immediately explain. The air here was colder than in the parts of the forest they had just crossed. The wind did not stir, yet their skin felt as though whispers slipped through the trees. The deer was not simply wounded. Upon its body were marks too deliberate to be called natural. The wound seemed carved with intent, leaving strange patterns across its hide. The youngest hunter longed to flee, to abandon everything, but the elder's gaze held him in place. They stood by the water's edge, watching a creature perish, yet feeling as though they were witnesses to a message they could not understand. The moon above hung silent, bearing witness, while the forest around them grew still, too still, as if it too awaited the end of this life. When the deer released its final breath, the murmur of the stream grew louder, as though chanting a prayer without words. Once the deer had gone completely still, the hunters stood in a heavy silence, as though the air itself pressed upon their chests with an unseen weight. None dared to touch its body immediately, for there was a rooted hesitation, a faint whisper in their thoughts that perhaps it was better left untouched. Yet curiosity often grows stronger than fear, especially when confronted with signs that defy the ordinary. The wounds upon the deer's body no longer appeared to be the work of claws or the bite of wolves, but rather deliberate carvings, lines crossing over one another. Their form almost resembled symbols, though none among them had ever seen such shapes before. An elder crouched down, his hand trembling as he reached toward the mark, only to pull back quickly, as if the animal's hide still held an unnatural warmth or chill. Another tried to reason that it might have been nothing more than sharp branches or jagged stones cutting into the deer's flesh during its frantic flight. But the longer they looked, the harder it became to dismiss the feeling that the marks were the work of something more cunning. Something driven by intent they could not understand. In the stillness of night, only the stream whispered. Yet even that sound felt like a murmur trying to speak, though in no language they could interpret. The moon hung above, pale and unblinking, casting its cold light across the water as though to spotlight the animal's body as silent evidence of a mystery uninvited, but now undeniable. The old hunter finally let out a long breath, as though the air leaving his lungs carried memories long hidden, surfacing only when forced by circumstance. He gazed at the wound upon the deer's body, then turned to the others, his eyes clouded not only by age, but by something deeper, something no simple words could express. Slowly he began to speak, his voice calm and flat, flowing as if from a distant place older than himself. He told them he had once heard a story from his grandfather about animals found dead with wounds that did not come from the teeth of wolves or the claws of bears. The wounds always bore a repeating form, lines etched into patterns that defied understanding. People of that time believed those signs were messages, not meant for humans, but for the spirits that dwelled among forest and stone. No one knew their meaning, but all agreed that when the marks appeared, something was destined to change, though no one could predict whether such change would bring fortune or ruin. That story had once been dismissed as a fireside tale, something forgotten as soon as the embers dimmed. Yet now, before their eyes, the tale had returned, clothed in flesh and blood. The younger hunters swallowed hard, not daring to interrupt, for they felt the old voice was not one to be broken. They listened, and in the flow of the river, beneath the pale moonlight, a story that should have remained buried with past generations rose again, clinging to reality like a shadow unwilling to let go. As the deer's body stiffened and dew thickened upon the grass, one of the younger hunters noticed something nearly overlooked. Near the animal's leg, half buried in damp earth and dry leaves, lay a small object that seemed out of place. He bent down, brushing away soil with trembling fingertips, then lifted it slowly, as though it might crumble at the slightest touch. It was not bone, nor an ordinary stone, but a small, smooth fragment, flat and rounded, its surface covered with delicate incisions resembling symbols. The moonlight falling upon it made the carving stand out more clearly, though still beyond comprehension. The other hunters quickly gathered around, staring in silence, as though quiet was the only fitting response to the mystery looming over them. The object was cold to the touch, colder than the night air, and a strange sensation crept from skin into flesh, as if touched by something not of this world. The young hunter tried to return it to the ground, yet his hand resisted, as though the thing exerted a pull upon his fingers. They did not know whether it was a creation of men or a remnant of something older, darker and deeper than the life of the forest itself. One thing was certain, however. The object had not appeared there by accident. It seemed deliberately placed, a marker or a message meant only for those willing to hear the whispers carried by bone, by soil, and by a silence that was never truly empty. They stood in a circle around the object, while the nearby fire flickered as though it breathed with their unease. The night wind blew colder, carrying faint sounds like a whisper in the distance, though perhaps it was only dry leaves stirred by air. The young hunter still clutched the object, his fingers stiff, as if an unseen force refused to let him release it. Some whispered that it should be buried again, covered with soil, and forgotten as though it had never been found. Others argued it must be taken back to the settlement, shown to the elders, so its meaning or its danger could be understood. A quiet debate began, but their voices stayed low, as though speaking too loudly might awaken something sleeping beyond the trees. One of the older hunters murmured that things discovered near death were rarely gifts, but warnings. Yet his words did not push them toward decision. They merely stood, letting time slip beneath the moonlight, as if waiting for a sign from the sky or from the earth. The fire crackled on, and the scent of burning wood mingled with a faint metallic temps that seemed to seep from the small object itself. None could say what was more frightening, to leave the thing in the silent forest, or to bring it home and allow the mystery into their dwellings. In the end, no one truly dared to decide, and the night carried on, slow and heavy, drawing them into a circle of silence that deepened, as though all that lived were but shadows following the whispers of bones in the soil. At last, when the night thinned and the stars seemed to retreat behind drifting clouds, one of them finally spoke with a steadier voice, though still quiet. He said that leaving the object in the forest would be more dangerous than taking it home. If it truly was a bad omen, then abandoning it here might anger the spirits of the woods, for they had uncovered something only to forsake it. His words silenced the others, and slowly they nodded. The decision was made without cheer, without further debate. Only through subtle nods and glances that carried understanding. The young hunter, who had been holding the object all along, placed it into a leather pouch, sealed it tightly, and fastened it at his waist. From that moment, they seemed to move more quickly, lighting torches and deciding to return to the village. Yet the journey home did not feel the same. The forest, usually crossed with light steps, now felt denser, colder, and as though unseen eyes watched from behind the dark trees. Night birds no longer called. Only the faint trembling of leaves could be heard. Some turned their heads now and then, making sure nothing followed, though they all knew their fear was not of wild animals, but of something unseen. The leather pouch that held the object swung with each step of the young hunter, producing a faint metallic rasp. The sound was small, yet enough to raise the hairs on everyone's neck. None dared admit they regretted the choice, for to do so would show weakness before the others. And so they pressed on, cutting through the night, carrying the strange object back to their settlement, not knowing whether they bore knowledge, disaster, or merely a fragment of history that should have remained buried forever. Upon reaching the village, the atmosphere felt different than usual. The central bonfire, around which the simple houses were arranged, was nearly extinguished, leaving only faintly glowing embers. The dogs that normally greeted returning hunters lay still, watching from a distance with wary, glinting eyes. The air of the settlement felt heavier, as if carrying unspoken news, as though the spirits of the night had already preceded their arrival. The hunting party walked slowly toward the central circle, and one by one, people began emerging from their homes, awakened by the mingling sounds of footsteps and an unusual whisper of wind. The weary faces of the hunters met questioning gazes from those who waited. There were soft murmurs, children hiding behind their mothers, and an old man standing with a wooden staff, observing with suspicious eyes. The young hunter who carried the object at his waist remained silent, though he felt every gaze fixed upon him, as if the leather pouch radiated something unseen. The elder of the village finally appeared, clad in an old robe of deer hide, his face etched with deep lines of age. He spoke little, only letting his eyes pass over each member of the group before settling on the young hunter. Without being asked, the hunter removed the leather pouch and lifted it with both hands, presenting it to the elder. There was no sound but the faint crackle of the dying fire and the sighing wind stirring the dry leaves. The elder did not open the pouch immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes as though listening to something no one else could hear. After a long pause, he exhaled deeply and murmured that this object did not belong to their world. His words hung in the air, thickening the tension already present. Yet no one moved or protested. All knew from that moment their small settlement would never be the same again. The elder held the leather pouch with both hands, his thin fingers trembling faintly, as though his body felt vibrations beyond the reach of ordinary sight. The circle of people grew tighter, and the air around them seemed to press inward, making each breath sound heavy. Slowly, he loosened the cord that sealed the pouch, the rasp of dried fibers against one another, echoing clearly in the silence. From within, he withdrew an object that made everyone fall silent. Not gold, not a precious stone, but a small bone, polished smooth, perhaps from the hand or foot of a child. Pale with a faint sheen, as though it had once been immersed in both fire and water. On its surface was carved a circular pattern, marks too precise to be the gnawing of an animal, too systematic to be coincidence. All eyes fixed upon it, some lowering their gaze, others stepping back, while a few tried to stare longer, as if searching for a meaning hidden within. The elder lifted the bone toward the dim glow of the embers, showing it to all who were present. Then he spoke in a flat voice, saying that this was not merely a remnant of a body, but a message. A message perhaps left behind by those who vanished thousands of seasons ago, or by something older than the seasons themselves. No one dared to respond. Even the crickets that usually accompanied the night seemed to vanish, leaving only the pounding of hearts echoing louder in each listener's ears. That bone, simple in form, had now become the center of attention, a new axis for fear, wonder, and curiosity interwoven into one. The people gathered in the circle began to whisper, voices overlapping like the rustle of wind through dry leaves. Some said the bone should be destroyed so that any spirit bound to it would not return to disturb them. Others believed the opposite, that the bone was a key to understanding something long lost from human memory. Their faces revealed hesitations, some bowed their heads in fear, while others lifted their gaze, eyes filled with curiosity. The fire that once blazed brightly slowly dimmed, as if the embers themselves were waiting for a decision whose outcome no one could foresee. A young woman, whose voice was seldom heard in gatherings, suddenly spoke calmly. She said that the bone might not be merely a sign of death, but a sign of life that once existed, and that destroying it would be the same as erasing the trace of those who once walked this earth. Her words left some silent longer than before, trapped between fear and reverence for something beyond their understanding. The elder only closed his eyes, as though unwilling to give a definite answer, as if his duty was only to reveal, not to decide. That night ended without resolution, the bone placed back into the leather pouch, stored at the center of the circle, as though it had become a new axis for their lives. No one touched it again, yet no one could stop thinking about it, even when their eyes closed. From that night on, every dream carried the shadow of that bone, appearing in different forms, as though it wished to say something that could never be translated into words. The dreams first appeared as vague images, like mist covering the view of a valley in the morning. Each person saw them in different ways, yet the essence of what they experienced always felt the same. Some saw flames rising from blackened earth, while others saw a long red river that never ceased to flow. Some claimed to hear a voice calling from afar, not in a language they recognized, but in a tone that pierced their curiosity. Children woke drenched in cold sweat, saying they had run through forests they had never seen before, while the elders awoke with heavy eyes, as though burdened by memories that were not their own. Over time, they realized the dreams were not merely fleeting illusions, but messages that returned again and again, lingering in the mind even after the sun had risen. The bone kept within the leather pouch seemed to have become a doorway between two worlds: the tangible world of fire, stone, and flesh, and another world that hid ancient stories long forgotten. No one could explain why everyone began to dream similar things, even when they slept in different places or stayed awake through the night. It was as though the bone breathed without a body, spreading its breath into every soul nearby. The voices in the dreams sometimes came closer, sometimes retreated, yet always left behind a sense that something remained unfinished, something waiting to be discovered, though none knew whether what awaited was truth or merely a confusing shadow. The days that followed grew strange, as if daily life became intertwined with remnants of dreams that never faded. When the sun rose and its light fell upon the valley stones, people still felt the echo of voices from their sleep. Some sat by the fire with vacant stares, lips moving without sound, as if continuing conversations that existed only in dreams. Children refused to wander too far from the tents, afraid the forest would shift into a long corridor like the one they had seen in their sleep. Hunters, once steady and fearless, began losing their composure for when they aimed at prey. The shadow of the Red River flashed before their eyes, making their hands tremble. Women who prepared food also changed, arranging meat on stones in patterns they had never done before, like circles that mirrored the arrangement of the bones they had unearthed. None could explain why their hands moved in such ways, as though controlled by something older than their own memories. Night became a tense time, for all knew they would once more be drawn into the same dreams, and the more often it happened, the more. They felt that dreams and the waking world were but two sides of a single space that could not be separated. Some began to wonder whether they were still living their ordinary lives, or if they had already stepped upon the threshold between a past and a future they could never fully understand. The bones once seen merely as the remains of the dead now seemed like markers, reminding them that death was not an end, but a doorway to something vaster, something that involved them whether they desired it or not. There was one night when the campfire died out sooner than usual, and the darkness crept in thicker than on any day before. In that moment, the dwellers of the valley felt something different, as if the air itself held memories. The damp scent of earth mingled with the aroma of old charcoal, like ashes from a fire, long extinguished yet still lingering. People sat close together. No songs, no laughter of children, only faint whispers broken now and then by the breath of the wind. In the midst of that silence, an elder slowly rose, his eyes blank as they fixed upon the moonless sky. He raised his hand and pointed toward the mound of bones half buried in the soil, then spoke in a hoarse voice that perhaps it was not merely a grave, but a doorway. The word doorway silenced them even more, as though the air itself held its breath. They began to recall their recurring dreams, the endless corridor, the Red River, the wordless whispers. All of it felt like an invitation, or perhaps a warning. None dared to approach the bones that night, yet none could turn their thoughts away from them. It was as if the bones glowed in the darkness, though no light touched them. Children wept softly without cause, mothers held them tighter, and hunters sharpened their spears, not for hunting, but because unease gripped their hearts without reason. That night no one slept soundly, and even those who dared to close their eyes endured only briefly before awakening with a weight on their chest, as though something stood above them. The mystery that once felt faint now seemed more real, closer, like something waiting to be opened, and they knew sooner or later they would be forced to step through it. The next day, the sunlight that should have brought warmth instead felt pale and heavy, as though the light itself carried tidings no one wished to hear. The people awoke with swollen eyes, some still haunted by the same dream, an endless corridor with walls that pulsed as if they were breathing. They gathered near the small stream flowing along the valley's edge, its waters clear yet colder than usual, as if it too concealed secrets untouchable. The elders spoke softly, exchanging glances filled with silence more than words. They agreed to interpret the dream as a sign, though none knew from where that sign had come. Some believed it was a message from ancestors. Others felt it was a warning from something far older than their ancestors. The children were told to stay away from the mound of bones, though within their hearts curiosity burned stronger than caution. A few hunters took the initiative to dig a little soil around the burial, uncovering old charcoal still blackened, as if the remains of a fire long dead yet lingering. They brought it to the elders, and one elder whispered faintly that this charcoal was not merely remnants of fire, but the mark of a last feast before the spirit departed. His words made the air heavier, and all lowered their gaze into silence. None knew if what they were doing was a mistake, or the first step toward an answer that had long been hidden. Yet the night just past had left its trace upon their hearts, and everyone now realized that they were walking a path not of their own choosing, but one chosen for them by something unseen and perhaps never meant to be found. The days that followed carried with them a thickening sense of strangeness in the valley, as though every shadow cast between the trees bore eyes that watched. The wind, once gentle, now carried whispers that raised goosebumps on the skin, though no words could ever be clearly understood. When people walked closer to the mound of bones, their steps grew heavier, as if the earth itself resisted their presence. Some women began to dream of faces they had never seen before, faces that seemed to belong to another age, with eyes empty yet filled with a gaze. Hunters noticed their prey dwindling, animals avoiding the valley, as though they knew something was there to be shunned. The elders tried to calm everyone with simple rituals, burning dry leaves and releasing the smoke into the air, hoping restless spirits would return to peace. Yet the smoke only circled in one spot, refusing to spread, as though pulled by an unseen force. The air grew quieter still. Even the crickets fell silent when night descended. A child asked innocently whether the bones were truly asleep or only pretending, waiting for a time to rise again. The question made the adults exchange uneasy glances, for in their own hearts the same question had begun to form. No answer could ease their unrest, and in the end, they could only accept that this valley was no longer merely a place to live, but a doorway slowly opening toward something they did not understand. One morning, as the mist still hung low over the ground, a young boy discovered a large stone, half buried, near the edge of the mound. At first, the stone surface seemed ordinary, but when the fog shifted with the wind, faint carvings became visible upon it. The markings formed patterns that resembled no animal, plant, or anything familiar to their eyes. Circles repeated over and over. Straight lines intersected one another, and shapes emerged like eyes gazing from every direction. The boy called for the elders, and soon a small crowd gathered around the stone. They touched the carvings carefully, feeling the cold surface, a cold that seemed not of night nor season, but of something much older. Some thought the symbols might have been made by their ancestors, while others felt the markings were older than any memory ever held. That night, many dreamed of circles spinning in the air, slowly turning into a dark vortex that pulled everything inside. Upon waking, they still remembered those shapes, as though dream and reality had folded into one another. The stone became a new center of attention, yet no one dared to move it, and none could turn away. It stood as a sign that could not be erased, a reminder that this valley held not only bones, but also secrets perhaps deeper than death itself. The days that followed felt altered, even though the sky remained the same. For everyone who had seen the stone sensed their view of the world subtly shifted in another direction. They began to notice strange patterns on tree bark, in cracks in the earth, even in the glittering flow of water under the sunlight. As if their eyes had been trained to recognize what was once hidden. Lines they had never noticed now appeared clear and interconnected. Some began to whisper that the stone was not merely an inert object, but a window to a forgotten language, perhaps older than the words they spoke. Children playing near the mound would sometimes stop suddenly, staring at the sky or into the ground, as though hearing a call no one else could hear. On certain nights, when the sky was heavy with stars, some felt the stars themselves arranged in the same patterns as the carvings on the stone. Circles and lines seemed to bind earth and sky, tethering them to something unreachable. The village elders urged that the stone be left untouched, unmoved, simply observed. Yet in their hearts they knew its presence had altered their daily lives, like a shadow that could not be erased from the mind. Every meal cooked, every step taken, seemed to carry a new resonance that could not be explained, all leading to one vague conclusion that the people of the valley were only a small part of a larger story, one whose ending no one would ever know. Night slowly became a space filled with whispers, not from human voices, but from a sensation clinging to the air like a thin mist carrying a hidden message. Those who dared to keep watch near the stone often said that sleeping there was different. Dreams came sharper, longer, filled with figures they did not recognize. Some dreamed of walking across vast plains under a black sky with no stars, lit only by a glow rising from within the earth. Others saw unfamiliar faces with deep eyes, speaking without moving their mouths. Each dream was different, yet carried the same feeling that their world was only a fragment of something far greater. Some villagers grew afraid, unwilling to approach the place again, while others sought comfort near the stone, hoping to understand what was truly speaking to them. The elders called these dreams reflections of spirits attempting to send a message, though no one could grasp their meaning. In daily life, the shadow of those dreams lingered, making hands tremble while lighting a fire or hearts race at the sound of wolves howling in the distance. The stone was no longer just an object buried in the ground, but a threshold, faint and uncertain. Never fully open, yet ajar enough to reveal that life had never entirely belonged to them. Over time, the stories of dreams, whispers, and the stone spread, not only among those who lived in the village, but also to strangers from afar, merchants, hunters, even wanderers who stopped only briefly. Some dismissed it as a tale meant to frighten children, while others came specifically to see if something unusual truly lingered there. Yet everyone who approached returned with a strange heaviness, as though carrying back something they could never set down. Shadows crept into their nights, the sense of being watched, or dreams too vivid to ignore. A few even fell ill without reason. Bodies weakened, eyes vacant, as though a part of them had been left behind near the stone. Then came a more pressing question: what if the spirits residing there were not human at all, but something older than all of them, something that had existed long before the first fire was ever lit by mankind? No one knew the answer, and perhaps no one dared to truly seek it. The mystery endured, silent yet suffocating, like a dark hole waiting for someone to stare too deeply into its depths. And within all that uncertainty, one truth remained: they lived side by side with something they could not understand, yet could feel in every breath of the night wind. And so the time came when the story no longer needed to be added to or diminished, for it had taken on a life of its own, layered within memory and whispers passed from one generation to the next. The stone still stands, the bones remain buried, and the night wind still circles, carrying the scent of damp and ancient earth. There is no answer that is ever certain, no ending that is absolute. Only shifting shadows, faint voices rising between gusts of wind, and the quiet weight left in the hearts of those who dared linger there too long. Perhaps this tale is nothing more than a bedtime story, or perhaps it is a fragment of history still waiting to be unearthed. Whatever it may be, it lingers, unresolved, never fully clear, yet just enough to leave us pondering before our eyes grow heavy. And when the eyelids finally close, the real world and the hazy one melt together, leaving us in a long silence, as if all those ancient mysteries have chosen to rest within our dreams.